least the one who actually understands me. My husband announced across the dinner table at his firm's anniversary gala, his hand resting on his colleague's arm like it belonged there. We just connect on a level that's hard to explain. I sat 3 seats away, holding a glass of Pinot Noir I hadn't touched, surrounded by his partners and their spouses, and I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, because I had already decided what I was going to do about it. Let me back up. My husband. I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was that night, legally and on paper. Had been a project manager at a mid-size engineering firm in Calgary for 11 years. We'd moved there from Toronto when his career started gaining traction, the year after our daughter was born. I put my own career on pause. Just temporarily, we both said. I was a licensed occupational therapist with a solid client base back east, and I told myself I'd rebuild it once we were settled. Once he was stable. Once our daughter was in school. Once. The colleague whose arm he was touching was named Philippa. She was 31, divorced, no kids, and she joined his firm 8 months earlier. I'd met her at a summer barbecue where she'd shaken my hand very deliberately and told me I must be so proud of everything my husband had accomplished. The way she said my husband, like she was testing the weight of the phrase in her mouth, stayed with me for weeks. I filed it away somewhere and tried to forget about it. I should have paid more attention to the filing cabinet. That night at the gala, in the ballroom of a hotel downtown, my husband gave a speech about his team and used the word partnership 4 times. He thanked Philippa twice. He thanked me once, at the very end, almost as an afterthought, for, and I remembered this exactly, keeping the home fires burning. The table laughed warmly. I smiled. His senior partner's wife leaned over and whispered that it was so lovely to have a supportive spouse, and I nodded and said yes. It really is, isn't it? We drove home in silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where both people know something has shifted and neither one wants to be the first to say it out loud. Our daughter was at my mother-in-law's for the weekend. The house felt very large and very quiet. You seemed distracted tonight, he said, hanging up his jacket. I was fine, I said. Philippa thought you seemed off. I turned around slowly. You talked to her about me. It came up. I went upstairs. I ran a bath I didn't get into. I sat on the edge of the tub for a long time, looking at the tile grout I'd had recaulked the previous spring because he complained it was yellowing, and I thought, what exactly am I holding together here, and for whom? That was October. By January, I knew. I didn't know because I snooped through his phone or hired someone. I knew because I'd spent 15 years learning to read every small shift in his behavior the way you learn to read weather in a place you've lived long enough. The light returns from the office that had a different energy than actual overwork. The way he started closing the bedroom door when he took calls on weekends. The gym bag he started packing on Tuesday evenings when, to my knowledge, he had never once gone to the gym on a Tuesday in his life. I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I called my sister in Mississauga. She's a paralegal, and she'd been quietly telling me for 2 years to just know where everything is, just in case. I used to wave her off. That January night, I asked her to recommend a family lawyer. She didn't say I told you so. She sent me a name within 20 minutes. I booked a consultation for a Thursday morning when my husband was in Edmonton for a site visit and my daughter was at school. The lawyer, her office was on 8th Avenue, very calm, very no-nonsense, asked me to describe our financial situation, and I started talking. And somewhere around the 40-minute mark, I realized I knew considerably more than I'd given myself credit for. Our house in the Northwest End was mortgaged jointly, but the down payment, $87,000, had come entirely from an inheritance I'd received when my grandmother passed. I had documentation. Our RRSP contributions were split, but I had been the one managing the accounts since 2019, when he'd handed me the login information and said, "You're better at this stuff." His TFSA was in his name only, but the family savings account, the one where we deposited everything that wasn't earmarked for bills or retirement, was a joint account I'd been steadily contributing to for a decade. There was also the matter of my career. When I stopped taking clients in Calgary, I hadn't dissolved my practice. I'd put it on hold. My Ontario registration had lapsed, but my Alberta College membership was still active. I'd paid the annual dues every single year, almost out of stubbornness, or maybe out of something I didn't want to name. I had a credential and a gap and a story that any employer in health services would understand. The lawyer told me to gather documents quietly and bring them back. She told me nothing had to happen quickly. She told me that the most important thing right now was to understand exactly what I had. I spent the next 6 weeks doing exactly that. I am, by nature, an organized person. My husband used to tease me about my color-coded binder system, my labeled file folders, the way I kept receipts in envelopes marked by category and year. What he didn't realize was that this system had, entirely by accident, created an almost perfect financial record of our marriage. I had utility bills going back 8 years. I had the deed and the original mortgage documents. I had tax returns, T4s, the notice of assessments the CRA sends out every spring that most people throw away. I had everything. He had none of it. He'd never needed to. I was there. In February, during a week he was away at a conference in Vancouver, I moved the bulk of my documentation to a fireproof box I kept at my sister's place in the east end of the city. I also quietly opened a personal checking account at a credit union I'd never used jointly with him. I transferred 6 months of emergency savings, money that was mine by any reasonable accounting, from a joint account I was equally entitled to, into it. I did this on a Thursday. The transfer cleared by Friday. He never noticed because he never checked the joint account. That was my job. I want to be very clear about why I'm telling you this, and in this order, it wasn't cruelty. It wasn't revenge for its own sake. I was a 39-year-old woman who had reorganized her entire life around someone else's ambitions, and I was, for the first time in years, thinking about my own. The moment it became irreversible, the moment I understood we were truly done, happened not dramatically, not in a screaming fight or a tearful confession, but on a completely ordinary Tuesday in March. Our daughter had a parent-teacher interview that afternoon. Her teacher, a warm woman named Mrs. Okafor, had requested both of us come in if possible. I'd reminded my husband twice. He'd said he'd try to make it work. At 3:45, I sat down across from Mrs. Okafor and answered all of her questions alone, again, while my husband sent a text at 3:52 that said, "Something came up, sorry, fill me in later." Mrs. Okafor was very kind. She pretended not to notice. I drove home. Our daughter sat in the back seat eating the granola bar I kept in my purse for exactly these kinds of after-school moments, and she asked, without looking up, "Was Daddy there?" "No, sweetheart." She nodded in a way that was too understanding for a 9-year-old. That nod broke something open in me that I hadn't realized was still sealed. That evening, after she was in bed, I called my sister. "I'm ready," I said. The process served itself out over 3 months with the steadiness of something that had been a long time coming. My lawyer filed for divorce in early April. My husband was served at his office on a Wednesday morning, which I chose deliberately because Wednesday was the day Philippa's team had their weekly stand-up meeting, and I knew from years of hearing about his schedule that he would be surrounded by people when it happened. He called me 47 times between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. I answered the 48th. "When were you going to tell me?" His voice was that particular register between fury and panic that I'd heard before, but never quite directed at me. "I just did," I said. "The paperwork is in your hands." You can't just. We need to talk about this. We need to work through this." "I've been ready to talk for about 2 years," I said. The window's closed. He arrived at the house that evening. I'd expected that. I'd also, quietly, changed the locks the previous Saturday while he was golfing with his brother. He stood on the front step and rang the doorbell of his own home while I stood in the kitchen and listened, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly. More like the specific quiet that follows a very long exhale. Our daughter was at my mother's that night. I'd arranged it. He had keys that no longer worked, a joint credit card I'd had the limit reduced on through our bank, and a Visa expense account he used for client dinners that I knew, because I filed the household taxes, was linked to a business account that was registered under my accountant's advice as a spousal business for income-splitting purposes. The implications of that had not yet occurred to him. They would. What followed was not a war. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I think we often frame these endings as battles, and I don't think that's accurate or useful. What followed was an accounting, a slow, methodical accounting of a marriage that had, somewhere along the way, become entirely unbalanced. The family home went through formal appraisal. My original down payment contribution was recognized and deducted from the equity split. The joint savings were divided. His TFSA was his. My personal account at the credit union, opened prior to any formal separation proceedings, was mine. My occupational therapy practice, the one I'd maintained on paper through a decade of not using it, was valued as a professional asset, and because it was mine alone, it stayed mine. I re-registered with the College of Occupational Therapists of Alberta that May, updated my liability insurance, and took on 3 clients by mid-June through a clinic in the neighborhood where I'd grown up in this city, run by a woman I'd met at a continuing education weekend years earlier who'd always said to call if I ever wanted to come back. I called. I will never forget the first afternoon I finished a session, walked out into the sun on a Calgary street that smelled like spring and diesel and coffee, and thought, I remember this. I remember feeling like I was good at something. The Philippa chapter ended before the divorce was finalized. He told me himself in one of our mediation sessions, in that way people confess things when they're hoping the confession will change the arithmetic. It didn't. What struck me was that he seemed genuinely surprised, like he'd expected the relationship to be more substantial than it turned out to be once the drama of the situation fell away. That's the part that stays with me, actually. Not the betrayal, not the logistics, not the year of legal correspondence and asset disclosure forms. What stays with me is the look on his face in that mediator's office when he realized that the thing he'd blown up our marriage for hadn't turned out to be what he thought it was. I didn't say anything. I signed the next form my lawyer placed in front of me. Our daughter navigated the year the way children do when they have 2 parents who are determined, despite everything, to remain decent in front of them. She is stubborn and funny and very observant. She knows more than we've told her, and she processes it in her own time. At Christmas, she asked to spend the morning at my place and the afternoon with her dad, and I said of course. We are still working on this, and it is hard, and I think it will be hard for a while, and I have made my peace with that. Some nights I lie in my new apartment, smaller than the house, quieter in a way that took some getting used to, with windows that look out over a park, and I think about all the things I set aside. The clients I didn't take, the conferences I skipped because the timing was inconvenient for his schedule, the professional development weekends I budgeted out because we were trying to save while he was joining a private golf club with a $4,000 annual membership that I had also, technically, been helping to fund. And then I think about the Tuesday afternoon in my clinic, the window light coming through at a specific angle, a client saying something that finally clicked for them, and me thinking, I never actually lost this. I just stopped reaching for it. I got a letter from his mother in November. She is a dignified woman who I have always respected and who has, throughout this year, managed to remain fair to both of us in a way that must have cost her something. The letter was short. She said she didn't entirely understand what had happened, but that she could see I'd been carrying things quietly for a long time. She said she hoped I would find my footing. She said she thought I already had. I think she was right. I am not the person who sat at that gala table holding untouched wine and smiling when I should have been asking harder questions of myself. I'm also not interested in performing a triumphant exit. What I have is something quieter and more durable than that. I have my credential back, a caseload that's growing, a daughter who calls me every night at 8:30, regardless of whose house she's at, and the knowledge that the foundations I was quietly building while someone else took credit for the structure were mine all along. I did not vanish without a warning. I gave him years of warnings. He just wasn't paying attention to the right person. There's something I keep coming back to, months after all the paperwork was signed and the file boxes were emptied. It's not the gala. It's not the 47 missed calls. It's a Tuesday afternoon in a clinic room, the light coming through the window at a low angle, and a client saying something that finally made sense to them after weeks of working at it, and me thinking, quietly, I never lost this. I just stopped reaching for it. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in a bitter way, in a clarifying one. The choices we make or don't make accumulate over time the way interest does, quietly, invisibly, until one day the balance is undeniable. My husband didn't end our marriage at that gala. He ended it across 100 small moments where he chose not to see what was right in front of him, and I didn't save myself that April when the papers were filed. I saved myself across all those years. I kept paying my college dues, kept my files organized, kept showing up to Mrs. Zara Okafor's classroom alone and answering every question with as much dignity as I could manage. The outcome wasn't luck. It was the long, slow result of what we both been choosing all along. What I know now, and what I wish someone had said to me clearly earlier, is that integrity doesn't announce itself. It's not the dramatic moment. It's the Tuesday you show up anyway. It's the annual dues you pay on a credential you're not actively using because some part of you isn't ready to let go of who you were before you made yourself smaller for someone else. It's keeping your grandmother's documents in a labeled folder for 8 years, not because you're planning anything, but because you were raised to be responsible and that instinct turned out to matter enormously. The quiet, consistent doing of the right thing, for yourself, for your daughter, for the version of your life that was still possible. That's what held everything together when the structure fell. And the intelligence piece, I want to be honest about this, isn't about being smarter than anyone. It's about paying attention. I paid attention to what was changing in my marriage long before I was willing to say it out loud. I paid attention to what my sister had been gently telling me for 2 years. I paid attention in that lawyer's office when I started talking and realized I knew considerably more than I'd been giving myself credit for. Clear thinking is available to most of us, but only if we're willing to see what's actually there instead of what we wish were there. That's the harder discipline, honestly. The paperwork is easy compared to that. What kept me going through the months of disclosure forms and mediation sessions and the particular loneliness of parallel parenting someone you used to love was something I can only describe as stubbornness of spirit. Not anger, not pride, just the refusal to accept that the story was over because one person had decided to stop showing up for it. My daughter needed me functional. My clients, once I had them again, needed me present. I needed myself to still be someone I recognized. That commitment to keep going, through the hard Tuesdays, through the empty apartment evenings, through the slow rebuild, that's what actually carried me from the gala to the garden I'm planting now. My husband's mother wrote me a letter that said she thought I had already found my footing. I think she was right. And I think she meant something more than just the career, or the apartment, or the settled custody arrangement. She meant that some people, when everything they've been propping up finally falls away, discover that they were the foundation the entire time. That's not a small thing to find out about yourself, even if the finding out cost everything it cost.